Most people move into HOA neighborhoods to find peace, a slower pace, a cleaner environment, and a sense of community pride. For many, it's a promise of tranquility where every detail is meticulously managed. But not every promise holds true when one person's obsession with perfection spills over into personal vendettas. I jolted awake to the deafening silence that replaced the familiar hum of my farm's irrigation system. Something was off. As I peered out the frost-kissed window, I couldn't help but notice the uneasy quiet that had blanketed our usually vibrant street. Today, I would soon learn that tranquility in our neighborhood came at a price Karen was all too willing to impose. It all began the previous evening when a commotion stirred near our cul-de-sac. In the dim light, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure storming out of a pristine, well-manicured house, a face I'd come to dread, that of HOA Karen Miller. Known for her unwavering zeal in enforcing every rule, no matter how trivial, Karen had once again taken it upon herself to protect our community's standards. This time, however, her target wasn't a crooked hedge or an off-color mailbox. It was something far more personal, my son's beloved dog, Buddy. I'd always known that Buddy, a sprightly, affectionate beagle with a heart of gold, was a favorite among the kids on our street. His gentle nature and endless energy brought smiles to everyone's faces. But last night, without any provocation, Karen had declared that Buddy's rambunctious barking and occasional misbehaviors were a public nuisance and an affront to the decorum of our neighborhood. In a fit of self-righteous fury, she had taken matters into her own hands, filing a formal complaint, and even calling the local authorities to have Buddy removed from our property. Little did she know, the law on pet behavior and nuisance was on my side. And tonight, as I watched the sunset cast long shadows over our HOA's perfectly trimmed lawns, I resolved that Karen's reckless act was about to backfire in the most dramatic way imaginable. Her overreach, intended to silence a harmless, joyful spirit, would soon become her own undoing. Today, I would show her that in our community, the law and the bond between a boy and his dog could never be so easily broken. Cedar Grove Estates was a haven of suburban perfection. Every street was lined with identical, meticulously maintained houses, and every lawn was a testament to the residents' commitment to order. The local homeowners association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, setting strict guidelines on everything from the height of hedges to the acceptable decibels of barking. For many, these rules were a small price to pay for the promise of a peaceful, safe community. At the heart of this tightly controlled neighborhood was Karen Miller, known to all as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and impeccably dressed in conservative outfits, Karen prided herself on her role as the enforcer of community standards. With a clipboard clutched in one hand and a smartphone always at the ready, she patrolled Cedar Grove Estates like a self-appointed guardian of order. Every stray leaf, every off-color decoration, every minor infraction was documented and promptly reported. Her reputation was both admired and resented. While some neighbors respected her dedication to perfection, many felt stifled by her relentless intrusion into their personal lives. I, on the other hand, had always cherished a different way of living. My modest home, nestled on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, was a patch of freedom where creativity was not only allowed but celebrated. I ran a small family farm on my property, a place where nature's unpredictability met the comfort of homegrown produce and the laughter of my son, Jamie. Among our many treasures was Buddy, our gentle beagle, who had been my son's constant companion since the day he was adopted. Buddy's joyful bark, playful antics, and unwavering loyalty made him a beloved figure in our home, and his presence was a source of comfort and joy in our otherwise chaotic world. While many in Cedar Grove Estates were content to follow the rigid guidelines set forth by the HOA, I had always believed in the importance of personal expression and individuality. My farm stand, my garden, and even the way Buddy roamed freely around our yard were all expressions of a lifestyle that valued authenticity over conformity. It was this very spirit this quiet rebellion against the suffocating strictness of our neighborhood that had drawn both admiration and ire. Over the years, Karen had taken every opportunity to remind me that nothing on my property was exempt from her scrutiny. Fines had been issued for minor deviations, a hedge trimmed too high, a mailbox that didn't match the approved color, even the layout of my farm stand. Each time, I tried to explain that my way of life was rooted in creativity, self-reliance, and a deep respect for nature's organic rhythms. But Karen saw these as nothing more than flouting the rules she had sworn to uphold. Then came the incident with Buddy. It started with a complaint. Karen's furious report that Buddy's barking and occasional misbehavior were a disturbance to the community's peace. Despite the many loving testimonials from neighbors who adored Buddy, Karen pressed her case. Her actions culminated in a call to the local authorities, demanding that Buddy be removed from our property. The injustice of it all was staggering, and it struck a deep chord within me and my family. This wasn't just about a dog. It was about the right to live freely and joyfully, to express the simple love between a boy and his pet without bureaucratic interference. And as I stood there, watching the sun set over our perfectly trimmed lawns, I knew that Karen's reckless act was about to come back to haunt her in a way that would not only reclaim our rights, but also serve as a bold declaration of independence. The fallout began almost immediately after Karen's call. That night, I spent hours reviewing the security footage and gathering statements from neighbors who had witnessed her tirade. The evidence was clear. Karen had not only filed a complaint against Buddy, but had gone so far as to demand his removal, citing vague nuisance clauses and an unwavering belief that our personal lives should be regulated by HOA edicts. My son Jamie was heartbroken, and the sight of Buddy, once a symbol of our home's warmth, now being demonized by someone with a skewed sense of order, ignited a fierce determination in me. I called an emergency family meeting. Jamie's eyes, wide with both fear and anger, met mine as I explained that this wasn't just about a dog. It was about our rights as a family to live on our own terms. I promised him that I would not let Karen's petty cruelty dictate our lives. And so, a plan began to form, a plan that would not only defend Buddy's honor, but also expose the overreach of an enforcer who had taken her mandate too far. I reached out to a trusted attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Together, we pored over the local ordinances and property rights laws. It became abundantly clear that Karen's actions were not only morally reprehensible, they were legally indefensible. The law protected our right to keep a pet and to live without unwarranted interference from an HOA that had no jurisdiction over the personal bonds that made our family unique. The legal backing gave me the confidence to take a stand. Determined to turn the tables, I decided that Karen needed to learn a lesson in accountability, one that would resonate through our community. I planned a counter-protest, but not one of shouting or vandalism. Instead, I chose to use the law as my shield and my sword. I began drafting a formal legal complaint against the HOA for overstepping its bounds, citing clear violations of our property rights and the unjust treatment of my family and Buddy. I made sure to document every fine, every incident, and every overzealous report that had been filed against us over the years. My goal was to not only have the fines rescinded, but also to compel the HOA to revise its draconian policies once and for all. In parallel, I organized a community meeting with other residents who had long suffered under the arbitrary rules enforced by Karen. The response was overwhelming. Neighbors came forward with their own stories of fines for minor infractions, of intrusive inspections, and of personal freedoms trampled in the name of community standards. The collective outcry grew louder with each passing day, and the digital petition I launched quickly gathered thousands of signatures. The momentum of the movement was undeniable. Our voices were uniting in a call for justice. As the legal preparations and community organizing continued, Karen's actions became a focal point in local media. News outlets began covering the story, interviewing residents and experts who condemned the HOA's invasive policies. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForBuddy, #NoMoreKaren, and hashtag family freedom. The public sentiment was clear. The community was ready to reject the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement. One evening, as I reviewed a particularly damning security clip of Karen ranting about public nuisances and orderly conduct, I knew that this was the turning point. I posted the video online with my own commentary outlining the legal protections that safeguarded our right to keep Buddy and live freely. The response was immediate and powerful. The video went viral among our community, further galvanizing support and reinforcing the notion that Karen's reckless act had indeed backfired. In the midst of all this, I continued to comfort my son, assuring him that Buddy was safe and that our family's bond was stronger than any fine or complaint. Each conversation, each supportive comment from neighbors, added fuel to my resolve. I wasn't going to let Karen win, not by the letter of the law, and certainly not in the court of public opinion. The conflict had now evolved from a personal dispute over a beloved pet into a community-wide battle for the right to live without oppressive interference. Every piece of digital evidence, every testimony from a wronged resident, became a building block in our collective case against the HOA's abusive practices. And as I prepared for the final showdown, a public hearing where the fate of our rights would be decided, I knew that Karen's reckless act was about to be met with a response that would echo throughout Cedar Ridge for years to come. In the days following the online release of the security footage and my impassioned legal complaint, the story of Karen's overreach took on a life of its own. Social media platforms buzzed with a mixture of outrage, humor, and fierce support. Videos of Karen's rant, now captioned with hashtags like hashtag Justice for Buddy and hashtag No More Karen, spread like wildfire throughout Cedar Ridge. Neighbors, emboldened by the evidence and their own experiences with the HOA's arbitrary fines, began to share their stories of arbitrary restrictions on everything from lawn decorations to the sound of child's laughter. Local news stations quickly caught wind of the controversy. Reporters arrived at our community, capturing the dramatic tension that had gripped Cedar Ridge. It's not every day that an HOA enforcer is held accountable for targeting a family's pet. One anchor commented during a live segment, his tone a blend of incredulity and support. Interviews with residents painted a picture of a community fed up with oppressive regulations and eager for change. The narrative shifted from a single incident involving a dog to a broader discussion about property rights, family values, and the importance of living without fear of intrusive bureaucracy. The HOA board, now facing a public relations nightmare, convened a series of emergency meetings. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed bitter divisions among board members. Some long-standing members, previously loyal to Karen, began to express doubts about whether her strict enforcement was truly in the best interest of the community. We have a duty to protect our residents' rights, not to suppress them with arbitrary fines. One board member was quoted as saying in a leaked email. The internal strife only amplified the public outcry, and digital petitions calling for reform of the HOA's policies gathered momentum. Thousands of signatures flowed in, demanding that the board revoke Karen's fines and implement a new framework for community governance that respected individual freedoms. In tandem with the legal process, community forums and town hall meetings became a battleground for impassioned debate. I attended several meetings where residents, previously hesitant to speak out, voiced their frustrations and shared their own experiences with the HOA's overzealous enforcement. My garden was fined for having a unique color scheme, something that should be celebrated, not punished, one resident exclaimed, her voice echoing through the crowded hall. The collective energy was palpable, and it became increasingly clear that the tide was turning against Karen and the oppressive policies of the HOA. I continued to update my digital dossier, posting new video clips of the evidence, screenshots of supportive social media comments, and detailed legal analysis that underscored our rights. My blog became a hub for community organizing, with residents offering suggestions and coordinating efforts to press the HOA board for reform. Every post was met with enthusiastic responses, and soon, influential local bloggers and even a few regional news outlets joined the conversation. This is a victory for all of us who believe in family, freedom, and the right to live without being policed by a fanatic, one blogger wrote, and the sentiment resonated widely. As the pressure mounted, Karen's attempts to justify her actions grew increasingly desperate. In a series of hastily recorded videos, she claimed that her actions were motivated by a genuine concern for community order and the well-being of residents. But the digital evidence, clear, irrefutable footage of her calling 911 on Buddy and the subsequent legal analysis, only served to undermine her narrative. The more she tried to defend herself, the more isolated she became, with even some board members beginning to distance themselves from a radical stance. The final public hearing was scheduled for a crisp morning, and anticipation reached a fever pitch. Neighbors organized peaceful rallies, and the digital petition peaked in numbers, with every signature symbolizing a stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Flyers and posters adorned lampposts around Cedar Ridge, bearing slogans like "Property rights are family rights" and "No more HOA bullying." The community was united in its determination to reclaim its voice and assert its rights. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the Cedar Ridge Community Center to find it packed with residents, local officials, and law enforcement representatives. The air was thick with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Every whispered conversation and nod of solidarity confirmed that this was more than just my personal battle. It was a watershed moment for the entire community. The digital dossier, meticulously compiled over weeks of organizing, was projected onto a large screen for all to see, each frame a testament to the injustice that had been inflicted upon my family. The tension was electric as the final moments before the hearing ticked by. It was clear that if the HOA board did not act decisively, the legacy of Karen's oppressive enforcement would continue to haunt Cedar Ridge. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would determine whether our community would continue to live under arbitrary restrictions or embrace a future of freedom and accountability. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, brisk morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and an impassioned assembly of residents, all gathered to witness the final public hearing that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm yet resolute demeanor, Councilwoman Rebecca James stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the collective determination of a community that had long been silenced. After a comprehensive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of fines, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman James began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, who sought to have our community conform to her narrow, arbitrary standards by targeting a beloved family pet, were not motivated by any genuine concern for public safety or order, but by personal bias and a gross abuse of power. Our community's right to live freely and to express our individuality, whether through our pets, our art, or our daily lives, must be upheld. A heavy silence fell over the room as James continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines to protect the property rights and personal freedoms of every resident in Cedar Ridge. Today's decision is not merely about correcting a single incident. It is a resounding declaration that we will no longer allow personal vendettas to dictate the rules of our community. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, a longtime defender of individual rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should have to live in fear of arbitrary rule enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that Cedar Ridge values creativity, family, and the sanctity of private life above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a collective call for justice. Following his address, a senior officer from the local public safety department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert analyses, and official documents that confirmed the legality of our actions and debunked every claim made by Karen Miller. The evidence was irrefutable. The complaint against our pet was baseless, and our right to keep our family dog and to live without arbitrary interference was protected by law. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any misuse of authority, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman James concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where every resident's rights are honored, where public authority is exercised with fairness, and where the creative, familial spirit of our community is never stifled." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will upon us without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live as we choose. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and personal freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Ridge underwent a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the need for accountable community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to live without fear of arbitrary interference. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreKaren, and #FamilyFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against oppressive rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where personal expression was celebrated rather than suppressed. Neighbors, once intimidated by the looming threat of arbitrary fines and intrusive HOA policies, now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property and live authentically. Our homes, our pets, and our way of life are our own, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing across the crowded hall. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always honor the rights and creativity of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, introduced comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was meticulously scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed in a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and accountability. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns to raise awareness about property rights and to empower residents to stand up for their creative and personal freedoms. When we unite, our voices have the power to dismantle even the most entrenched systems, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to join the call for a more inclusive, just governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's reckless interference, protecting my son's dog, and defending our family's right to live freely had not only restored our dignity, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Ridge. Neighbors who had long felt oppressed by arbitrary rules found their voices, sharing their own stories of resilience and unity. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private life and the inalienable right to live as one chooses. Karen Miller, once the feared enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly, and digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the fading light of a golden sunset. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Community Justice" was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches filled the air with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate the triumph of our rights over arbitrary interference, a victory for every family, every pet, and every resident who dares to live authentically, Councilwoman James proclaimed, her voice filled with resolute hope. The resounding applause that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protecting our freedoms and ensuring that no one could abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Ridge, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how Karen's reckless act against my son's dog backfired when she learned the law became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the importance of justice, individual rights, and the freedom to live without arbitrary restrictions. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and personal freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, family, and the respect for individual freedom shone brighter than any imposed rule.